Dallas's Jim Nill has been named the NHL's GM of the Year. And on today's episode, we'll cover how he won this award and whether or not the move he made back in September to acquire Nils Lundkvist was worth it for the Dallas Stars. We'll cover all of this on today's episode of the Locked On Stars podcast.
Your Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey, coming to you on this Thursday, June 29th. And today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It's the same with your vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit, ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Thank you for tuning in and making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. Whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener, we're always free and available no matter where or how you choose to listen. YouTube, your favorite podcasting platform of choice. We're here for you all season long and all off season long. As there is still plenty to discuss in the world of Dallas Stars hockey, especially as it pertains to the front office, as it was announced last night during the first round of the NHL draft that Stars general manager Jim Nill was awarded as the NHL's general manager of the year, winning over Boston's GM and former Dallas Star Don Sweeney and Florida's Bill Zito. An incredible honor for Jim Nill after what was an incredible season for him and the Stars organization. Jim Nill is more than deserving of this award after his work with the team over the last 12 months or so. He signed and hired Pete DeBoer to be the coach of the Dallas Stars, and he took them to a Western Conference final appearance and was a couple wins away from getting back to the Stanley Cup final for the first time since 2020. The Stars in general have been on a pretty good run over the past handful of seasons, either competing in the postseason or at least getting very, very close in that condensed season where if it was a normal year, maybe they could have made it without those realigned divisions. But especially this past year, have to give Nill a ton of credit for going out and hiring Pete DeBoer and then helping DeBoer build the right team in order to get the Stars as far as they were able to go in the postseason. He also took care of business in terms of signing players and getting the right talent long-term on the roster. He re-signed last offseason Jake Ottinger and Jason Robertson to extensions to help keep them in Dallas a little bit longer. And I imagine he'll be doing everything he can to keep those two in Dallas even longer once their current deals come to an end. And he also, in the middle of the season, made sure to lock up Roope Hintz for the next 8 seasons, as he has clearly become a fan favorite and one of the best players on the Stars roster, pound for pound, with everything that he brings to the ice on a nightly basis. He also made some great moves during the trade deadline this year and even last year, but I know that this is for, GM of the year, I guess, for this past season, but the trades for Evgeny Dadonov and Max Domi were both incredible trades in terms of the fact that the Stars got 2 very quality players that were contributors down the stretch of the regular season and in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and the Stars didn't necessarily have to give up too much. They didn't have to give up any extra draft picks, at least in this year's draft, and they didn't really have to give up too many valuable assets with prospects. They only gave up a few NHL caliber players, Denis Gurianov and Anton Hudobin. I don't know why Anton Hudobin's name slipped me just there, but only giving up those players, not giving up too much in return for players that were incredibly valuable down the stretch of the season. And Evgeny Dadonov now a part of the Stars' future for the next couple of seasons. The verdict's still out on Max Domi, but whether or not Domi stays in Dallas long term, he was still an incredible acquisition at the deadline. And I was incredibly glad to have him on the team for the postseason, as I know many of you were as well. Not enough can be said about what Jim Nill did this past season, impacting this team and impacting this franchise. And it feels like he's been doing this year after year after year. He's drafted incredibly well. He's drafted Wyatt Johnston, Logan Stankoven. And then if you even want to go back in time, it feels like he's finally starting to get some proper recognition for maybe even that 2017 draft class that featured Miro Heiskanen, Jason Robertson, and Jake Ottinger. That'll go down as one of the best draft classes in franchise history, with those three players all kind of the face of the franchise at each respective position. He drafts incredibly well. He tends to trade very well, as we mentioned this year at the trade deadline. Last year, going out and getting Scott Wedgwood was a very nice acquisition. He is probably going to be doing some sort of trading, I imagine, this offseason. Maybe not a major trade, but it certainly would not surprise me to see some players be on the move to come into Dallas that way. And he also has a tendency to go out and get some pretty nice free agent players. Joe Pavelski, for example, a pretty nice addition to the team a few years ago, who has been on a tear with the Dallas Stars ever since joining the team. And I know even last year, I think Mason Marchment is still a very good add to the team. I just don't think that we've seen him up to his full potential just yet. But I think that move will eventually work itself out. And I'm hoping that Jim Nill can make some very nice free agent acquisitions this offseason, starting on Saturday. He's been regarded as one of the most respected leaders around the NHL across the board. When you look at NHL GMs, tons of people on social media showing their support and affirmation of Jim Nill, as he's been recognized with this award for an incredible past 12 months with this Stars organization, and has them trending in the right direction, where they're hopefully going to be a very competitive club for the next handful of seasons. And let's hope that he can continue to keep the magic rolling here as we enter day 2 of the NHL draft, and also enter free agency, and hopefully maybe some trades to get this team restructured a little bit as the summer continues to go on. Well, one move that Jim Nill has made in the past year has been the acquisition of defenseman Nils Lundkvist, but that came at a cost. The Stars acquired Nils Lundkvist in exchange for their first-round pick in the 2023 NHL draft. So was it worth it? Was Nils Lundkvist worth not being able to draft on Wednesday night? We'll discuss that coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by AG1, the daily foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health. I drink it literally every day. I gave AG1 a try because I wanted better gut health and a boost in energy to start my day. I drink AG1 in the morning before making my coffee, starting my day, and it makes me feel ready to take on the day. AG1 is a foundational nutrition support supplement that delivers comprehensive nutrients to support whole body health. AG1 replaces your multivitamin, probiotic, and more in one simple, drinkable habit. I also like that it costs less than $3 a day. That's a pretty good bargain if you ask me, and it's really effective daily habit with high-quality sourced ingredients. Win-win across the board. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Just go to drinkag1.com/NHL network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL network. I want to thank you again for making Locked On Stars your first listen every single day, for continuing all the everydayers out there to make our podcast a part of your daily routine. Recording this at the end of the first round of the draft, the Sharks currently making a selection. Quentin Musty going left wing out of Sudbury, going 26th overall to the San Jose Sharks. Wanted to wait a little bit just to make sure that the Stars weren't going to make any sort of move to potentially get a first-round pick. Just knowing my luck, it seems like I would start recording, they would make a move, get a pick, and I would have to completely redo an episode. But this late in the NHL draft doesn't necessarily seem, at least in the first round, that the Stars are going to make any sort of move. So here we are, where the Stars, by the time you're listening to this, did not make a selection in round 1 of the 2023 NHL draft. And we all know why that is, because last year in September, before the start of the preseason, the Stars made a move that sent that first-round pick. It was a conditional pick at the time, but a pick to the New York Rangers in exchange for Nils Lundkvist. We all know that trade has now been sent to the St. Louis Blues, who, while I'm recording this, will pick here in just a moment, just a couple of picks away from that pick finally going live. But Nils Lundkvist came to Dallas in exchange for what would eventually be their first-round pick in 2023. So now, looking back almost a year later, a few months shy of it being a full year, but you kind of have to ask yourself, was this a good idea? And to answer the question, was it worth it? You can answer it in some ways, but I feel like it's hard to give a full, cohesive, permanent answer because only time will tell how good this player that whoever the Blues are going to draft will be. We don't necessarily know how their career will pan out. We probably won't see them in the NHL for 2-3 seasons possibly, just because you don't tend to see these later first round picks enter into the NHL super fast. You tend to see them continue to develop either with their junior club or if they're a player who's playing overseas with whatever league they're playing in, whether that be in Sweden or maybe somewhere else around the world. But you take a look at Nils Lundkvist. Nils certainly did show some excellent flashes for the Dallas Stars throughout the season. He recorded 6 goals and 10 assists, 16 points in 60 games played. And he did have some very memorable moments. I know the one that sticks out for me was his game-winning goal against the Detroit Red Wings back in December. An incredible game back and forth between those two teams, kind of a back and forth affair. Overtime almost coming to an end. One of the rare Stars overtime winning games in the 22-23 season. An incredible sequence between him and Mason Marchment to get the win over the Red Wings on home ice. Just an incredible finish and an incredible moment for Nils Lundkvist, one that I'm sure he will remember for a very long time with the reaction of the crowd and just with how the Stars had done up to that point in overtime, and especially how the season ended with the Stars performing in overtime. You have to imagine that felt pretty good for Nils Lundkvist to reach such a high point. But he had plenty of other memorable moments as well and had some pretty big goals. I know he had one kind of in the later stages of a game against the Vancouver Canucks that tied the game. I know the Stars would go on to lose that one, but still, there were moments where Lundkvist did show up in big moments. And even with some of this good, though, Nils did kind of become a non-factor as the season continued to wear on, especially at the end of the regular season, where the last handful of games he was scratched. And then we didn't see him a single time in the Stanley Cup playoffs. His minutes just went down and down and down, playing a ton of minutes early in the season, getting to almost the 20-minute mark on average per game, and even at times sharing minutes with Miro Heiskanen on that top defensive pairing. And while that duo wasn't always perfect, there was certainly some very nice moments between those two. And I think that there's the potential that we could see maybe Lundkvist slot into that role full time at some point, whether that be this season or maybe even somewhere down the road. But the point of what I'm trying to get at here is, he did show some really good signs, but he only played 60 games. It wasn't just at the end of the season that he was getting scratched. There were other points throughout the season where he would get scratched for 3, 4, 5 games in a row and then come back and play pretty well. But then we would see his play start to decline a little bit again. And this may be a concerning feeling for some Stars fans, knowing that you're not getting to pick in the first round of the draft. And you have this guy who, you deemed worthy of giving up that pick, but you only played him for 60 games. And you also didn't play him when it mattered the most in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I know that, there was an article that was put out by the Stars, by Mike Heika. They tweeted it on Twitter. And if you read the replies on the tweet with the link to that article, almost every single response is, why don't you play Nils? Why did we give up the pick? You're not even playing him. Have you considered playing him in the playoffs? I mean, so on and so forth. You guys get the gist of what was being said as that article went out. And I get that. I get those concerns. I get those critiques. But at the same time, Nils Lundkvist is only 22 years old. He'll turn 23 in July, but he's still growing. He's still learning. Not every single player clicks instantly in the NHL. I know that he wasn't necessarily a great player in the New York Rangers organization, but I think that organization maybe just was not for him, and that was not the right environment for him to continue to grow and try to elevate his game. Whereas I think that we've seen some true steps forward in the right direction with Lundkvist, with the Stars organization. And I know we get spoiled looking at guys like Miro Heiskanen, who came in and seemingly from day one took off and became an NHL stud. You look at Wyatt Johnston, who came in at 19 years old and lit the league on fire with 24 goals in his first season. And so I understand that you may be a little disappointed saying, well, this kid's 22. He had some NHL experience with the Rangers before. He's been in the NHL, AHL system for quite some time now, but it doesn't seem like his game has elevated to the level that it's needed to be at in order for him to be worth this potential, first round pick that the Stars could have had at 29th overall in last night's draft. And I feel like, again, those feelings are justified. You would like to see a little bit more production from a guy who was, I believe, 18th overall in the draft that he was taken in. But at the end of the day, I think that you just have to be patient with a guy like Nils, who is going to get better. He has shown that he's willing to put in the work. He's said and shown that, even though it's a bummer and he doesn't necessarily like sitting out and having to watch games from the press box and be a healthy scratch, he's learning from those situations. He's growing from those situations. And I truly do think that Nils is in a great environment to continue to learn and adapt his game with guys like Heiskanen on the roster. And, maybe even to some extent, guys like Thomas Harley, guys that he can look up to and learn with. I mean, I think Harley, as great as he was in the postseason, he still has some areas to grow in his game as well. And it just depends, player to player, how fast they tend to develop and truly get to their potential and reach that maximum level. And I know that Nils Lundkvist isn't there yet, but I do think that he can get there. And I know that the Stars want him to be a big part of this organization going forward. And I truly do believe that he can be that. And the fact of the matter is, I think that Nils is set to provide more instant value, or at least provide more value up front right now, as opposed to someone who would be selected 29th overall going to the Stars organization, because that pick probably isn't seeing the NHL, until 2 or 3, maybe even 4 seasons down the road, just depending on what position they are and what the team needs are as they continue to grow and develop their game, probably either overseas or with some junior hockey club in the Canadian Hockey League. And even if they are eventually NHL ready, who's to say that they're anything more than a middle six forward or a bottom pair defenseman? Whereas you have a guy like Nils Lundkvist, even though his game is still a little bit unpolished and still, not completely well rounded out, we do know that he is NHL ready. He can certainly hold his own most nights. Is he going to make mistakes? Sure. But what 22-year-old kid isn't going to make mistakes out there on the ice? I think that the odds that Nils Lundkvist pans out are higher than whoever the Stars could have gotten at 29th overall. And for all I know, the Blues got an absolute diamond in the rough, but the odds of that happening are incredibly low in a draft with over 200 picks. The idea that, the actual best player in the draft is going to come 29th overall, or a guy who's going to be the face of your franchise is going to come there, is incredibly unlikely. Whereas then you have a guy like Lundkvist, who probably isn't going to be the face of the franchise, probably is never going to be the number one defenseman. But I think if he continues to work and continues to clock in the hours and continues to do what's necessary to improve his game, I think he could be a very serviceable top 4 defenseman for this organization for the next handful of years. And I believe that that's what Pete DeBoer and the coaching staff see in him. I believe that's what Jim Nill saw in him when he made that move back in September. So I'm not too disappointed that the Stars didn't get a pick during the first round of last night's draft. I think that they could probably do just as well for themselves with the remaining picks that they have. And we'll discuss that here coming up in just a second, talking about what we can expect in day 2 of the NHL draft and what we can expect going into the weekend, as on July 1st, free agency opens up. We'll discuss all of that coming up next. Third and final segment of today's episode of Locked On Stars. Day 2 of the draft is upon us, and while it feels like some of the other teams are starting to have fun right now, a lot of teams getting to make selections on night 1 of the draft, the Stars still have the majority of their work set ahead of them. They get to make 5 selections in today's portion of the draft, and while it's highly unlikely that they're going to find an incredible diamond in the rough player who could be, a future face of the franchise, who's to say that, somewhere amongst those 5 picks, they won't find a guy who's at least an absolute steal. Maybe a guy who's playing top 6 minutes, or a defenseman who's playing somewhere in the top 4. Maybe some incredible goaltender. I don't know if they'll go goaltender, at least not early on. Maybe in the later stages of the draft, you see the Stars go goaltender. But I really am curious to see, because the Stars find themselves kind of in a unique situation. And I know on an episode earlier this week, I highlighted a few players that were defensemen. And I just on a hunch assume that that's maybe where the Stars will look to bolster the prospect core to build up that defensive unit. You already have some really good guys coming through the ranks in, Christian Kyrou, Leon Bichelle, and, Thomas Harley has now finally kind of completed his round of being a prospect and has now been promoted to the NHL level. So I imagine they will go the defenseman route, but also wouldn't surprise me if they go out and get a forward. I think the luxury of getting your first pick in the draft where you're getting it is that you can truly go best available, and you can look and see who the best option is at that juncture in the draft, and you can make the pick. And there probably won't be too much criticism at that point, because you believe that you've gone out and got the best player. And then at that point, it's up to that player to continue to put in the work and do what's necessary to put themselves in a successful position to hopefully contribute to the franchise somewhere down the road. I'm most optimistic about the second round pick that they'll eventually make it to the NHL and potentially, get to wear a Dallas Stars sweater one day, but maybe somewhere rounds 4 through 7, we're going to get to see a guy who might go under the radar, but ultimately could make a huge difference for the organization down the road. But then even beyond the draft, we have free agency set to begin on Saturday. And I think for the Stars organization this offseason, this is where the fun could truly start. At least to some extent. I know that the cap situation is kind of in a weird place with, they have around $5 million right now after the extension of Yevgeny Dodonov. You would expect them to re-sign Ty Dellandrea at some point. And I know Max Domi seems like he's on his way out. There were some tweets on Twitter saying Luke Glendening likely not coming back. So let's see who maybe the Stars can go out and get during free agency at some point on Saturday or maybe even beyond. And what's interesting here is, in something that I'm having to remind myself, and I'm sure many of you reminding yourselves as well, is the Dallas Stars don't have to go out and get these super flashy brand new names. I mean, if you're able to land a guy with a big name and a ton of pedigree for not a ton of money and not a ton of term, I don't necessarily see it happening, but if you're able to do it, that's great. But really the name of the game here, the key here for the Stars is to go out and add solid depth. Go out and add guys who have been veterans in this league, guys who knows what it takes to win games, guys who can provide a little bit of a physical side, but can also chip in if they're a forward somewhere on maybe on the middle six to provide some more true depth scoring. And if it's a defenseman, go out and find a guy that can, play top 4 minutes, maybe lay a few hits, block some shots, go out and look for some size, but maybe also some guys that can carry the puck. So that way Miro Heiskanen doesn't have to shoulder as much of the load on himself as he had to do throughout pretty much the entirety of the regular season and even in the playoffs. And as I'm recording this right now, watching one of the guys that I talked about earlier this week, Easton Cowan of the London Knights, drafted by the Toronto Maple Leafs at 28th overall. So if you watch that episode, you can throw that pick out the window, as the Stars will not be getting Easton Cowan, and the St. Louis Blues about to go on the clock with what would have been the Dallas Stars pick, but seems now that they will not be selecting in the first round. But more work to be done in rounds 2 through 7. And starting on Saturday in free agency. But that is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you so much again for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube. Follow along on your favorite podcasting platform of choice. We are always free and available no matter where or how you choose to listen. We'll be back here sometime tomorrow breaking down who the Stars got on day 2 of the draft. And I'm going to try to find out everything I can about these players to see who has the potential to be great for this organization and maybe who doesn't. We'll have to see who they're able to go out and get. I'm excited to see who's going to be joining the organization and excited for these next few days as the Stars hopefully continue to build a championship level team through the draft and free agency. But I hope you guys enjoy your Thursday. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you back here tomorrow.